Are there advantages to aging? Yes, I am Debbi-Jo Horton, and welcome to Advantages to Aging. Join my guests and I as we discuss aging and what makes for a healthy lifestyle, which results in a quality life. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome, listeners. You are going to be super excited to know that we have Barb Hubbard back with us to dive a little deeper into ADD and ADHD and how to use that as an advantage as we're aging. Welcome back, Barb.
Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. And if you have not heard Barb's first episode, you're going to want to listen to the rest of this one, but go back and find it in the show listings, but make sure you're hitting the subscribe button so that you don't ever miss an episode. So Barb is coming to us from California. She's a time management coach and an ADHD specialist. She's not a doctor, but she helps people to really look at the diagnosis of ADHD and really take the advantages that has and really excel in life. So welcome back again. And let's just dive right in. We're going to talk about the advantages of finding out that you have ADD or ADHD later in life. So why is it so important to look into an ADHD diagnosis at a later age? So you weren't diagnosed as a child, but you're thinking, I listened to that first episode and now I'm thinking maybe I should go get a diagnosis. Why would we do that?
Yeah, ADHD wasn't a thing when those of us our age were growing up. It wasn't very common to hear about it. It wasn't diagnosed very often, but that is not because it wasn't there. I think most of us in our 40s, 50s, 60s, we can think back to childhood and we know the kids in our class who, learned in a different way or seemed hyperactive or were super spacey, super forgetful. It was there. The doctors just weren't diagnosing it at such a prevalent rate. And many, many adults are finding out in their 40s, 50s, 60s that they have ADHD. And the reason to look into it is kind of twofold. One is to look back at your life and say, oh, that's why I made the decisions I did. That's why things didn't work out. That's why I struggled so much. And when you know that it is due to having ADHD, you can release some of that shame around that. People who, have lived with ADHD their whole life and don't find out till later often are walking around with a lot of shame, and they're worried about their next decision. They're worried about what they might do wrong moving forward. So part of it is releasing that shame. But the other part of it is if you find out now, you can learn about it. You can hire a coach. You can read the books. You can subscribe to the podcasts, right? And learn all about it and know what to do moving forward. And going back to, what we talked about in the previous episode, there are a lot of strengths. And so if you are looking into it now as an adult, you can find out what those strengths are and how to move forward with more success.
Excellent points. I'm thinking too that just releasing that shame and not having to hold on to it would be so freeing for so many people.
Yeah.
So what are some of the common tendencies of adults with ADHD? Shame probably being one of them, but I'm sure there are many others.
Yeah. Shame for sure, but some of the other things, when you think of a child with ADHD, you tend to think of little boys bouncing off the walls. That hyperactivity doesn't go away. It just changes a bit. So adults, the way that hyperactivity shows up is they're really fidgety. Maybe they have to, bounce their foot or play with something in their hands to kind of control that urge to move around. The other thing about hyperactivity is it's in the mind too. So when you're hyperactive and you move around a lot, it's not just about physical movement, it's also about your brain and the pace at which your brain is thinking. So adults will often tell me that their brain is always going and they have 50 ideas all at once and they're off on tangents thinking how to figure out this one and then that one and the next one. They talk about not being able to slow down enough to fall asleep at night because their mind is racing. Or when they're in a meeting and they have to share an idea, they're all over the place because their mind can't just focus on one thing at a time. So those are some of the hyperactive things. Women often present differently, and women are often seen as spacey, forgetful, daydreamers.
Really?
Yes. Often women don't have the hyperactive side, at least not outwardly where they need to move around a lot, but their brain may be racing. So it presents itself differently in men and women, in children and adults. I'm glad I'm not a doctor who has to diagnose because there's a lot of ins and outs of it. But women, they may appear very timid. They may lose their keys a lot, those kinds of things. Or sometimes they are super, super organized because they've learned to compensate for losing their keys, losing their papers. And the way that they grew out of that was to make sure that everything was in its place and their calendar was spot on so they didn't miss appointments and that kind of thing.
Now you got me worried.
No need to worry.
Oh my Lord, I think she's talking about me. I don't lose my keys because they have a place.
Yes,
I don't lose my appointments or double book because I have a paper calendar that I'm super diligent about keeping, and I kind of really struggled with everybody wanting a Calendly link to schedule their podcast interviews. So I've kind of adopted, but now I'm sitting here thinking, I think I'm going to just go with listening to all of the strengths and all of those tips and move forward with it.
Yes. Well, and I just see the strengths for you. If those tendencies are there, you have already figured out how to spin them around and use them as a strength. So I don't think you have anything to worry about.
No, well, and it's true because as you get older, you do think about things to help you. And one of the things that you said about, the brain going at 100 miles an hour and it's time to go to sleep. And I remember people saying, well, just keep a notepad by the bed so that you can just write down the idea. And I'm like, that didn't work for me. I was writing all night long. But I will share with you what one of my solutions to that has been when we take this little break, and you'll hear about some of the wellness that helps you to deal with any of those different things, falling asleep, calming the mind, and being able to wake refreshed. Be right back. If you're looking to help keep your brain healthy, Neora's EHT Brain Formulas got you covered. It was developed after 20 years of research by Dr. Jeffrey Stock, a Princeton University professor. EHT is decaffeinated. It focuses on B vitamins to sustain and increase energy. It also is BSCG certified, and it really helps to keep the neuronal connections in your brain healthy, helping you with focus and clarity, memory and recall, and really helping to rebuild those neuronal connections that can break down with age or injury. Now back to the show. Welcome back. We still have Barb here for a little bit longer. We're going to take this a little bit further. So we've been talking about ADD, ADHD primarily later in life. So what happens? Okay, so I was going to say what happens when you find out that you have ADHD and you're in your 50s. So since we were saying, it's kind of sounded like maybe let's say that you're in your 60s. Now what?
Yes, whether you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, obviously the younger you are when you're looking into this, the better, because as I said before, you don't want to be walking around with all that shame. So, if you are suspecting or wondering if you might have ADD, ADHD, the younger you are, the better, right? It's less mistakes to make once you figure it out and you can get support and move towards success. But if you are 50, 60, you are actually at a huge advantage because you have had all this time to really pinpoint the struggles that you're having. And if you get that diagnosis, you are very capable of reading and researching and listening to podcasts. You are very capable of reaching out for support and putting that in place very quickly. I think, kids, they're just told, they find out and they're like, all right, but they aren't equipped to understand what's really going on with them. When you find out later in life, you are equipped to learn about it and understand it. And I think that that's a huge advantage to finding out when you're older. The other piece of it is when you're a little bit older, usually you're at a place in your life where you can pivot and do something different with your life. So whether that's finding a different job or starting a side hustle, once you learn about yourself and how ADHD impacts you, you are just in a better space in your life to make some changes versus, when you find out when you're younger and you're just trying to hold on.
Well, and usually at that point too, you're not worrying about raising a family. So some of that focus can now be back on you.
Yes.
So you have the time to spend on yourself. This has been absolutely amazing. I always learn so much talking to Barb. I'm hoping that you did too. And thank you again, Barb, for sharing your wisdom. It has been phenomenal. I know you're going to have questions. But in the show notes, you're going to find all the contact information for Barb. So be sure to reach out and ask those questions.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you think one of the biggest advantages to aging is all the knowledge we gain along the way? Me too. What did you learn today? Share with me in my Facebook group with the same name as this podcast, Advantages to Aging. Now hit subscribe so you don't miss all the tips to come in future episodes.